An MMA coach loses his mind when a 12-year-old boy dares to defend his father's martial arts training, slapping the kid across the face in front of his entire gym. The muscle-bound bully towers over the crying child, screaming that traditional kung fu is worthless garbage while his teenage fighters laugh and film the humiliation. But the quiet man sitting in the corner isn't just another parent waiting for pickup. This is Donnie Yen himself, the legendary martial artist who's destroyed armies on the big screen. The coach has no idea he just assaulted a child in front of a man who spent decades perfecting the deadliest fighting techniques on earth. While the arrogant trainer keeps ranting about real fighting, the action legend rises from his chair with the fluid grace that made him famous. The boy's traditional forms suddenly make perfect sense. This kid's father was Donnie's own training partner 30 years ago in Hong Kong. The coach's students keep recording, thinking they're capturing another victory for modern MMA, but they're actually filming their leader's complete destruction. What happens when you slap a child in front of his father's legendary best friend? Can the bully survive 30 seconds against a living martial arts god? What happened next would terrorize the coach for the rest of his pathetic life. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt as Miguel Martinez pulled his weathered Honda Civic into the parking lot of Apex MMA Academy. The modest building squatted between a tire shop and a payday loan store, its windows plastered with posters of snarling fighters and championship belts. Miguel adjusted his community center uniform, a pale blue shirt with his name embroidered above the pocket, and glanced at his 12-year-old son Kevin in the passenger seat. "You sure about this, Mijo?" Miguel's calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles showing the faint scars from wooden dummy training decades ago in Hong Kong. "I know it's not the fanciest place." Kevin straightened his Phoenix Suns t-shirt and tugged at his father's old white GI pants, the only martial arts gear they could afford. "It's perfect, Dad. The other kids at school say this place teaches real fighting." He paused, studying his father's weathered face. "Not like the dancing you taught me." Miguel's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "What I taught you isn't dancing, Kevin. It's discipline, respect, control." He turned off the engine, the Honda's death rattle echoing across the parking lot. "Remember what I always tell you. Martial arts isn't about fighting," Kevin recited dutifully. "It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." "Exactly." Miguel reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "And no matter what happens in there, you keep your head up. The Martinez family has nothing to be ashamed of." Through the gym's front windows, Kevin could see muscular teenagers pounding heavy bags with methodical violence. The sound leaked through the glass, leather striking leather, coaches shouting corrections, the squeak of athletic shoes on mats. It looked nothing like the quiet forms his father practiced in their apartment's cramped living room every morning. Before work. "Dad." Kevin's voice carried a tremor he tried to hide. "What if I'm not good enough?" Miguel turned to face his son fully, his dark eyes serious. "Kevin, listen to me. Good enough isn't about how hard you can hit or how fast you can move. It's about your heart, your character. You have more of both than most grown men I know." A group of older teenagers emerged from the gym, their designer athletic wear and expensive gear making Kevin acutely aware of his secondhand clothes. They laughed loudly, shadowboxing as they walked to a lifted truck that probably cost more than Miguel made in 2 years. Kevin watched them drive away, then looked back at his father. Miguel worked double shifts as a janitor, his hands permanently stained from cleaning chemicals, his back aching from years of mopping floors and hauling trash. But somehow, in this moment, he seemed bigger than any of those teenagers. "Ready?" Miguel asked. Kevin nodded, bowing slightly before opening the car door, a habit his father had drilled into him since childhood. Always show respect when entering a place of learning. They walked toward the gym together, Miguel's community center uniform a stark contrast to the athletic wear of other parents dropping off their children. But he walked with quiet dignity, his posture straight despite years of physical labor. As they reached the entrance, Kevin took a deep breath and pushed open the glass door. The smell hit him immediately: sweat, leather, and something else. Aggression, maybe. Or ambition. "Here goes nothing," Kevin whispered, stepping into a world that would change everything. The interior of Apex MMA Academy assaulted Kevin's senses like a physical blow. The air hung thick with sweat and testosterone, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of gloves against heavy bags. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rubber mats stained with years of blood, sweat, and determination. Motivational posters covered every wall. Images of snarling fighters with captions like, "Pain is weakness leaving the body," and "Embrace the grind." At the front desk, 19-year-old Ashley Rodriguez looked up from her textbook with a practiced smile. Her Arizona State University sweatshirt and friendly demeanor provided the only warmth in the aggressive atmosphere. "You must be Kevin," she said, checking her computer screen. "First trial class?" "Yes, ma'am," Kevin replied, earning a surprised look from Ashley. Most kids his age didn't bother with manners. She handed him a waiver packet. "Your dad will need to sign these. Class starts in 15 minutes. You can change in the locker room." She pointed toward a hallway lined with championship photos and newspaper clippings. Miguel began reading the liability forms while Kevin absorbed the controlled chaos around him. In one corner, a massive Islander in his 20s threw a smaller opponent to the mat with bone-jarring force. Near the cage, teenagers drilled takedowns with the precision of soldiers. Everyone moved with purpose, aggression, and the confidence that came from knowing they could hurt people. "Excuse me." Kevin approached a group of boys near his age. They wore matching gym t-shirts and expensive gloves, their hair perfectly styled even after training. "I'm Kevin. It's my first day." A stocky kid with bleached tips looked him up and down, taking in the secondhand GI pants and beat-up sneakers. "Cool, dude. I'm Marcus. You done MMA before?" "My dad taught me some traditional kung fu," Kevin said proudly. "He has a black belt and everything." The boys exchanged glances, trying not to smirk. Another kid, this one with braces and an expensive mouthguard hanging around his neck, spoke up. "Traditional martial arts? Like Bruce Lee movie stuff?" "Sort of," Kevin said, demonstrating a simple blocking sequence his father had drilled into him thousands of times. His movements flowed with surprising grace, each position flowing seamlessly into the next. "My dad says real martial arts is about discipline and protecting people, not just fighting." The boys watched politely, but Kevin could see the skepticism in their eyes. This wasn't the brutal efficiency they practiced here. This looked like dancing. "That's pretty cool," Marcus said diplomatically. "But wait until you see what we do here. This is real fighting, you know? Like, what actually works in the octagon." Before Kevin could respond, a commanding voice cut through the gym's noise like a blade. "All right, ladies. Time to separate the fighters from the wannabes." Brad, the Hammer, Kowalski emerged from his office like a force of nature. At 35, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd spent years hurting people for a living. His thick neck bore the telltale cauliflower ears of a veteran grappler, and tribal tattoos snaked down both arms like war paint. His tight Under Armour shirt showcased a physique built for violence, and his cold eyes swept the assembled students with predatory intensity. "New meat today," Brad announced, his gaze settling on Kevin. "Hope you're ready to learn what real fighting looks like, kid." Kevin straightened his shoulders and met Brad's stare. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to learn." "Good attitude," Brad said, though. Something in his tone suggested he found Kevin's politeness amusing rather than admirable. "Let's see what you're made of." "Everybody circle up." Brad's voice echoed off the gym walls as students arranged themselves in fighting stances around the central mat. "We're starting with conditioning because weak bodies breed weak minds, and I don't train weaklings." Kevin took his place in the circle, trying to ignore the snickers from some of the older students. His GI pants and t-shirt looked absurdly traditional among the sea of matching team gear and sponsored athletic wear. 30 burpees, and I want to see explosion on every rep." Brad positioned himself in the center like a drill sergeant, his eyes scanning for signs of weakness. "This isn't yoga class. I want to see some intensity." The count began, and Kevin immediately fell behind. While the other students powered through the exercise with practiced efficiency, he struggled with the unfamiliar rhythm. His form remained perfect, back straight, controlled movements, but his endurance lagged noticeably. "Come on, Martinez," Brad barked. "Your daddy's kung fu didn't prepare you for real conditioning?" Several students chuckled, but Kevin kept moving, his face flushed with effort and embarrassment. He finished 10 reps behind everyone else, gasping for air while the veterans barely looked winded. "All right, technique time," Brad announced, rubbing his hands together with obvious relish. "Today we're working double-leg takedowns, the foundation of real fighting. Watch and learn." He demonstrated the move on Marcus, driving his shoulder into the boy's hips and lifting him effortlessly before controlling the descent to the mat. The execution was flawless, brutal in its efficiency. "This is what wins fights," Brad explained, helping Marcus to his feet. "None of that fancy footwork movie bullshit. Just raw technique and commitment. Pair up and drill it." Kevin found himself partnered with Marcus, who tried to be encouraging despite the obvious skill gap. "Don't worry, man. It takes time to learn this stuff." When Kevin attempted the takedown, he approached it like one of his father's techniques: measured, controlled, focused on not hurting his partner. The result was tentative and ineffective. "Martinez," Brad's voice cut through the drilling. "What the hell was that? You're supposed to be taking him down, not asking for permission." "Sorry, sir. I'm just trying not to hurt him." Brad's laughter was harsh. "Kid, this is fighting, not a tea party. If you're worried about hurting people, maybe you should take up chess." Tyler Brennan, a cocky 17-year-old with bleached hair and the build of someone who'd never lost a high school fight, decided to add his own commentary. Maybe his dad's kung fu classes didn't cover actual contact. He said loud enough for everyone to hear. Kevin's face burned, but he maintained his composure. "My father taught me that martial arts is about control and respect, not just hurting people. Control and respect." Tyler laughed, his voice dripping with teenage arrogance. "Dude, that's not martial arts. That's meditation with hand gestures. This is real fighting." The other students snickered, and Kevin felt the familiar weight of being different, of not fitting in. But instead of backing down, he straightened his shoulders. "My dad has a black belt," Kevin said quietly but firmly. "He's really good, even if he doesn't show off about it." Tyler exchanged glances with his friends, barely containing his amusement. "A black belt in what exactly?" "Tai Chi in the park. Traditional Kung Fu," Kevin replied, his voice stronger now. "He learned in Hong Kong, and he taught me that real martial artists don't need to prove themselves by bullying people." The gym fell noticeably quieter, several conversations trailing off as students sensed brewing conflict. Brad stepped closer, his expression shifting from amused condescension to something darker. "Bullying." Brad's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Kid, let me explain something about the real world." Brad's face flushed red, veins standing out on his thick neck as Kevin's words hit their mark. The gym fell completely silent. Even the heavy bags stopped swaying as everyone turned to watch the confrontation unfold. "Your daddy's black belt." Brad stepped closer, using his 6'2" frame to tower over the 12-year-old. "Kid, I've forgotten more about fighting than your old man will ever know." Kevin instinctively stepped back, but didn't lower his eyes. Something his father had taught him: never show fear to a bully, even when you feel it burning in your chest. "Traditional martial arts is useless fantasy bullshit," Brad continued, his voice rising with each word. "Dancing around in pajamas, doing little forms, pretending you're some kind of warrior. That's not fighting, that's make-believe." Ashley looked up from the front desk, her textbook forgotten as she watched the confrontation with growing unease. Several of the older students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that their coach was crossing a line. "But sir," Kevin said, his voice trembling slightly but still respectful, "my dad taught me that martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about discipline, and discipline." Brad's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Your daddy's a janitor, kid. If his kung fu was so great, don't you think he'd be doing something more with his life than mopping floors?" The words hit Kevin like physical blows. He could feel tears starting to build behind his eyes, but he blinked them back. His father had taught him that a Martinez never cried in front of bullies. "My dad works hard to take care of me," Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying surprising strength. "And he taught me that real martial artists don't need to hurt people smaller than them to feel strong." Tyler Brennan's eyes lit up with malicious glee. This was better entertainment than he'd expected from some new kid. "Oh snap, coach. The little ninja just called you a bully." Brad's face went from red to purple. In his mind, he'd built this gym into a temple of real fighting, a place where fantasy met reality and reality always won. This kid, this scrawny 12-year-old in secondhand clothes, was challenging everything he'd built. "Listen here, you little shit," Brad snarled, jabbing his finger at Kevin's chest. "Your daddy's black belt doesn't mean squat in the real world. Traditional martial arts is for movie stars and old men who can't handle real fighting." Kevin's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice remained steady. "He's taught me that martial arts is about respect and honor, not hurting people smaller than you." That was the breaking point. The slap echoed through the gym like a gunshot. Crack! Brad's open palm caught Kevin across the left cheek with enough force to stagger the boy backward. The sound seemed to hang in the air, followed by a silence so complete that even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Kevin stumbled, his hand flying to his burning cheek as tears finally spilled over. The red handprint stood out starkly against his brown skin, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a scared 12-year-old boy who'd just been struck by a grown man. Ashley gasped audibly from behind the front desk, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Several students took involuntary steps backward, suddenly understanding that they'd witnessed something that crossed far beyond acceptable boundaries. But in the corner of the gym, unnoticed by everyone caught up in the drama, a modest Asian man in his late 50s looked up from his phone. He'd been sitting quietly in a plastic chair, reading glasses perched on his nose, waiting patiently to pick up his nephew from the previous class. Danny Chen set down his phone with deliberate care, removed his reading glasses with practiced precision, and focused his full attention on the scene unfolding before him. His expression shifted from casual observation to laser-focused intensity as he watched the crying child and the man who'd struck him. Something about the boy's stance, his hand positioning, even his way of breathing through the pain, triggered memories from 30 years ago in Hong Kong. The traditional forms he'd glimpsed during warm-ups, the respectful manner, the defensive philosophy, it all seemed hauntingly familiar as Kevin wiped his tears and prepared to gather his dignity for the walk of shame to the exit. Danny rose from his chair with fluid grace that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of movement. The reckoning was about to begin. Kevin stood frozen in the center of the mat, his cheek burning from Brad's slap as tears mixed with the sweat from training. The gym remained unnaturally quiet, the only sound his ragged breathing as he tried to process what had just happened. Around him, students stared with a mixture of shock and uncomfortable fascination, like witnesses to a car accident they couldn't look away from. Brad flexed his fingers, seemingly surprised by his own violence, but not apologetic about it. "Maybe that'll teach you some respect for reality, kid. This is what happens when fantasy meets the real world." Danny approached with steps so quiet they seemed to absorb sound rather than create it. His simple navy tracksuit and reading glasses made him appear completely unremarkable, just another middle-aged Asian man in a gym full of warriors. But something in his movement spoke of contained power, like a sword resting in its sheath. "Excuse me, young man," Danny said softly, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of Hong Kong origins. "I couldn't help but notice your form during the demonstration earlier." Kevin looked up through tear-blurred eyes, surprised that anyone was speaking to him with kindness after his humiliation. The stranger's face was gentle but alert, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "Your foundation," Danny continued, ignoring Brad's confused stare. "Very traditional Wing Chun structure. The way you breathe, how you hold your center, someone taught you properly." "Who was your instructor?" Kevin wiped his nose with the back of his hand, struggling to find his voice. My dad, sir. Miguel Martinez. He learned in Hong Kong before I was born." Danny's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of recognition crossing his features like lightning. "Miguel Martinez," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. "Tell me, does your father have a small scar on his left hand?" "Right here." He indicated the space between thumb and index finger. Kevin's eyes grew round with amazement. "Yes, from wooden dummy training." Who are you?" A warm smile spread across Danny's face, transforming his entire appearance from mild-mannered observer to something far more significant. "Your father and I trained together many years ago. He was one of the most dedicated students I ever knew, and one of the best friends I ever had." The revelation hit Kevin like a physical force. This stranger knew his father? Had trained with him? In Hong Kong? His mind raced with questions, but before he could voice them, Brad's impatient voice cut through the moment. "Hey, Grandpa," Brad called out, his tone dismissive and crude. "We're kind of in the middle of something here. If you want to chat about the good old days, maybe find a coffee shop." Danny turned toward Brad with the measured precision of someone accustomed to command, though his expression remained perfectly polite. "I apologize for the interruption. I was simply concerned about the young man." The kid learned a valuable lesson about reality, Brad said, puffing out his chest. "Traditional martial arts doesn't work in real fighting. I was just showing him what happens when fantasy meets facts." "I see." Danny's voice remained calm, but something subtle shifted. In his posture, a nearly imperceptible settling into a more balanced stance. "And you determined this by striking a child?" The question hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in silk. Several students sensed the change in atmosphere, though they couldn't quite identify what had shifted. Tyler Brennan, still riding the high of watching Kevin's humiliation, decided to insert himself into the conversation. "Look, old man, this is how we do things here. Real fighters don't cry when they get touched up a little." Danny's gaze moved to Tyler with the focused attention of a hawk spotting prey. "Real fighters," he repeated thoughtfully. "And how long have you been a real fighter, young man?" "Long enough," Tyler replied with teenage bravado. "I've got 12 amateur wins, and I'm going pro next year." Not like this kid's dad, mopping floors and pretending he knows kung fu. Kevin flinched at the insult to his father, fresh tears threatening to spill. But Danny stepped closer to the boy, his presence somehow protective without being threatening. "Kevin," Danny said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your father taught you well. The respect you show, the way you defend his honor even when you're scared. That takes more courage than any cage fight." He looked back at Brad and Tyler, his expression still polite, but carrying an undercurrent of something far more dangerous. "Perhaps we should discuss what real martial arts actually means." Danny's gentle touch on Kevin's shoulder seemed to steady the trembling boy, but his eyes never left Brad's face. The gym's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the confrontation, highlighting the stark contrast between Danny's calm demeanor and Brad's aggressive posturing. "Your father taught you well, Kevin," Danny said softly, his voice carrying decades of authority wrapped in kindness. "The respect you show, the way you defend his honor even when you're scared. That takes more courage than any cage fight." Kevin wiped his eyes, straightened by the stranger's words. "You really knew my dad in Hong Kong." "Miguel was my training partner for 2 years," Danny replied, his smile genuine and warm. "We practiced together every morning at sunrise in Victoria Park. He had the most dedicated spirit of anyone I trained with. Always first to arrive, last to leave, never complained about the pain." Brad rolled his eyes dramatically. "Great, another old-timer living in the past. Look, Pops, I don't know what fantasy land you and this kid's janitor daddy came from, but this is reality. Traditional martial arts is dancing. Modern MMA is fighting. Dancing." Danny's voice remained perfectly level, but something shifted in his stance, feet positioning slightly wider, weight distributing with unconscious precision. "Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the difference?" The gym fell silent again, but this time the quality of silence was different. Where before it had been shocked stillness after Kevin's slap, now it carried the electric tension of impending storm. Tyler laughed harshly. "Oh, this is rich. Grandpa wants to throw down with Coach Brad. Dude, you're like 50 years old." 57. "Actually," Danny corrected mildly. "Though I appreciate your concern for my advanced age." Ashley watched from the front desk, her sociology textbook forgotten, as she witnessed something that felt far more significant than a simple gym confrontation. Her instincts told her this quiet man was dangerous in ways Brad couldn't comprehend. "You know what?" Brad's voice carried the cruel anticipation of a bully sensing easy prey. "I'm tired of listening to traditional martial arts bullshit. You want to see what real fighting looks like, old man? Let's make it educational." Danny removed his reading glasses with deliberate care, folding them neatly before sliding them into his tracksuit pocket. The simple action somehow transformed him. Where before he'd seemed like someone's grandfather, now he appeared focused with predatory intensity. "I wouldn't want to presume upon your hospitality," Danny said politely, But if you're offering to demonstrate your superior methods, I'm willing to learn. Oh, I'll teach you something, all right. Brad began pulling off his gym shirt, revealing the thick torso of a former heavyweight fighter. But let's make this interesting. You win, I'll apologize to the kid and give him free training. I win, you pay me 10 grand and take your ancient philosophy somewhere else. Danny nodded once, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of martial tradition. Acceptable terms. Kevin watched in amazement as this mild-mannered stranger, his father's old friend, calmly accepted a challenge from the man who'd just humiliated him. Something told him he was about to witness something extraordinary. Around them, the gym began to buzz with anticipation as word spread that their invincible coach was about to destroy another delusional traditional martial artist. None of them had any idea what was coming. Word of the impending confrontation spread through Apex MMA Academy like wildfire. Students from other classes began filtering in, drawn by the electric atmosphere and the promise of watching their seemingly invincible coach demolish another traditional martial arts dreamer. By the time Brad finished his warm-up routine, nearly 40 people had gathered around the main mat area. "This is gonna be epic," Tyler whispered to his training partners, already positioning his phone to capture what he assumed would be Brad's easy victory. Coach is about to show this old dude what real fighting looks like. Danny stood quietly in the corner, performing simple stretching exercises that the gathering crowd mistook for nervousness. His movements were fluid and economical, each stretch flowing seamlessly into the next with the kind of unconscious grace that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of preparation. Ashley found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Her part-time job at the gym had exposed her to plenty of testosterone-fueled posturing, but this felt different, more serious, more dangerous. The quiet Asian man didn't look like the usual delusional tough guys who occasionally challenged Brad. There was something in his stillness that spoke of contained violence. "You sure about this, coach?" Marcus asked, though his voice carried more excitement than concern. "I mean, the dude's gotta be like 60. Kid, I've been fighting professionally since before you were born," Brad replied, shadowboxing with fluid combinations that showcased his power and technical skill. Age and treachery beats youth and skill, but youth and skill with modern training beats ancient bullshit every time. He'd called in some of his wealthier gym members, local businessmen, who enjoyed watching real fights and often placed private wagers on sparring sessions. Within minutes, side bets were being arranged through whispered conversations and subtle nods. Danny finished his stretching and walked to the center of the mat, still wearing his simple navy tracksuit and comfortable sneakers. Next to Brad's intimidating physical presence, 6'2", 215 pounds of muscle, covered in fighting scars and tribal tattoos, he looked absurdly outmatched. "Last chance to back out, Grandpa," Brad said with false magnanimity. "I don't want to explain to your family why you're drinking dinner through a straw." "Your concern is touching," Danny replied calmly, "but I believe I'll manage." The crowd formed a loose circle around the two men, phones appearing as students prepared to capture and share what they assumed would be a quick, brutal lesson in reality. Tyler positioned himself for the best angle, already composing the social media post that would make him internet famous. "Rules are simple," Brad announced to the crowd. "No weapons, no eye gouging. Fight stops when someone taps out or goes to sleep. Other than that, anything goes." He cracked his knuckles with theatrical menace. "Hope you're ready for some education, old man." Danny simply nodded, settling into a stance that looked deceptively casual, feet shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing deep and controlled. To the untrained eye, he appeared completely unprepared for violence. But Kevin, watching from the sidelines with tears still drying on his cheeks, noticed something the others missed. The way Danny held his center, the subtle positioning of his feet, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. It was exactly like his father's morning practice sessions, but refined to a level Kevin had never seen. "Begin," Brad shouted, immediately charging forward with the aggressive rush that had overwhelmed dozens of opponents. What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present for the rest of their lives. Danny moved like flowing water, making Brad's powerful overhand right punch hit nothing but air. The bigger man's momentum carried him forward, off balance, directly into Danny's controlled response. A series of movements so subtle and precise they seemed almost gentle, until Brad collapsed, unconscious, without Danny appearing to exert any real effort. The silence that followed Brad's collapse was so complete it seemed to press against everyone's eardrums. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody could process what they'd just witnessed. Brad, the Hammer, Kowalski, former UFC fighter, local tough guy legend, destroyer of martial arts fantasies, lay unconscious on his own gym mat, brought down by a man who looked like he should be teaching math at the local community college. Tyler's phone continued recording, capturing the impossible scene for posterity. His mouth hung open as he stared at his fallen coach, the arrogant commentary he'd planned to provide dying in his throat. Danny stood over Brad's prone form, not celebrating or gloating, but checking with practiced efficiency to ensure his opponent was breathing normally. He knelt briefly, checking Brad's pulse and positioning his head to maintain a clear airway, then stood and bowed respectfully to the unconscious man. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the crowd. "What the hell just happened?" Ashley watched from behind the front desk, her hand covering her mouth in shock. She'd seen Brad demolish dozens of challengers over the past year. Big men, experienced fighters, aggressive young athletes who thought they could test themselves against a former professional. None of them had lasted more than 30 seconds once Brad decided to end things. This fight had lasted exactly 30 seconds, but with a completely different outcome. Kevin stared at Danny with something approaching worship. This quiet, kind man who spoke of his father with such respect had just done the impossible. He'd made the gym's most feared fighter look like a helpless child. How? Marcus managed to croak, speaking for everyone present. Danny straightened his tracksuit and retrieved his reading glasses from his pocket, sliding them back onto his nose with the casual air of someone who'd just completed a minor task. "Traditional martial arts," he said mildly, when properly understood and applied. The crowd began to stir, whispered conversations breaking out as people tried to process what they'd witnessed. Some of the students looked at Danny with newfound respect, others with fear, and a few with the kind of suspicion reserved for things that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. "But he's just an old guy," Tyler protested weakly, his worldview cracking like ice under pressure. "Coach Brad was a professional fighter. He's beaten everyone who's ever challenged him." "Your coach is skilled and powerful," Danny acknowledged, kneeling to check on Brad again as the bigger man began to stir. "But he fights with anger and ego, not wisdom. Power without wisdom is just noise." Brad's eyes fluttered open, confusion replacing the aggressive confidence that usually dominated his features. He sat up slowly, one hand going to his jaw where Danny's precise strikes had disrupted his nervous system just enough to shut down his consciousness without causing permanent damage. What happened?" Brad mumbled, looking around at the circle of stunned faces. "You demonstrated the difference between fighting and martial arts," Danny replied gently, offering his hand to help Brad stand. "Though perhaps not in the way you intended." Brad stared at the offered hand for a long moment, his pride warring with the reality of what had just occurred. Around him, his students and members watched with rapt attention, waiting to see how their fallen hero would respond to his impossible defeat. Outside in the parking lot, unnoticed by anyone inside the gym, two men in expensive suits watched through the window from inside a black Mercedes sedan. They'd been conducting routine surveillance of the gym as part of a larger operation, but what they'd just witnessed changed everything. Viktor Volkov lowered his binoculars and started the engine, his mind already racing with possibilities and problems that this development would create. Brad struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady as the full reality of his defeat crashed over him like a tidal wave. Around the mat, his students and gym members stared with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to barely concealed fear. The natural order of their world had been shattered in 30 seconds by a man who looked like he should be teaching philosophy rather than delivering devastating martial arts techniques. "I don't understand," Brad mumbled, rubbing his jaw where phantom pain lingered from strikes he'd barely felt. What did you do to me?" Danny adjusted his reading glasses with the same calm precision he'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Wing Chun trapping techniques to control your hands, followed by pressure point strikes to specific nerve clusters along your neck and shoulder. Your nervous system simply paused for a moment. He spoke as if he were explaining a mathematical equation rather than describing how he'd systematically dismantled a professional fighter twice his size. Tyler stood frozen, his phone still recording as his brain struggled to process the impossible footage he'd captured. This wasn't supposed to happen. Modern MMA was supposed to have proven the superiority of contemporary fighting methods over ancient martial arts. Yet he'd just watched a middle-aged man in a tracksuit make their coach look like a beginner. That's impossible, Tyler protested, his voice cracking slightly. Traditional martial arts doesn't work against real fighters. Everyone knows that. Danny turned to face the teenager, his expression patient but firm. Perhaps the problem isn't with traditional martial arts, but with your understanding of what martial arts actually means. Ashley found herself leaning forward over the front desk, completely absorbed by the philosophical discussion that was unfolding in the aftermath of the physical confrontation. Her sociology coursework had taught her about paradigm shifts, moments when established belief systems crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. Kevin approached Danny cautiously, still in awe of what he'd witnessed. "Sir, are you going to teach my dad's friend a lesson about respect now?" The question hung in the air as everyone turned to look at Brad, who was still struggling to reconcile his worldview with his current situation. The terms of their agreement were clear. Danny had won, which meant Brad owed Kevin an apology and free training. But more than that, he owed everyone in the gym an explanation for how everything they thought they knew about fighting had just been proven wrong. Danny placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Your father's lesson was already delivered, Kevin. Now it's time for understanding, not revenge." He looked around the circle of stunned faces, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades mastering not just the physical aspects of martial arts, but the wisdom that separated warriors from mere fighters. True martial arts isn't about proving superiority or dominating others, Danny said quietly. It's about developing the character to use power responsibly, the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict, and the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Brad slowly nodded, the words hitting him with more force than any physical blow. For the first time in years, he was listening to someone who possessed something he'd never developed: genuine martial arts philosophy married to devastating practical skill. Outside, Viktor Volkov pulled out his phone as his Mercedes drove through the Phoenix traffic. The conversation he was about to have would change everything for everyone involved, though none of them knew it yet. "Alexei," Viktor said when his brother answered, "we have a situation at the gym. Find out everything you can about an Asian man, approximately 57 years old, who just made Brad Kowalski look like an amateur." He paused, watching the gym disappear in his rearview mirror. "And Alexei? This is priority one. I think we just found our next main attraction." The drive to Miguel's apartment complex felt like traveling between two different worlds. Danny's rental car, a modest Toyota Camry, wound through Phoenix's working-class neighborhoods where chain-link fences separated small yards from cracked sidewalks, and evening shadows stretched long across streets lined with aging cars and dreams deferred. Kevin pressed his face against the passenger window, still buzzing with excitement and 1,000 questions. "Uncle Danny, can I call you Uncle Danny? How did you make that big guy fall down so fast? And why didn't my dad ever tell me he knew someone famous? And are you really in movies?" Danny smiled at the boy's enthusiasm, remembering Miguel at that age, equally curious, equally eager to understand the mysteries of martial arts. "One question at a time, Kevin. And yes, you may call me Uncle Danny. Your father and I were like brothers once." They pulled into the Sunset Gardens apartment complex, a collection of two-story buildings painted in faded pastels that had seen better decades. Children's bicycles littered the courtyard, and the sound of multiple televisions leaked through thin walls. It was a far cry from the luxury hotels and first-class accommodations Danny had grown accustomed to. But something about its honest simplicity felt like coming home. Miguel emerged from apartment 2B before they'd even parked, worry etched deep in his weathered features. Kevin should have been home hours ago, and Miguel's imagination had conjured every possible disaster. When he saw his son climbing out of a stranger's car, relief and protective instinct warred in his chest. "Kevin, where have you been? I was about to call. Miguel's words died in his throat as the driver stepped out of the car and straightened up under the parking lot's fluorescent lights. Even 30 years older, even softened by success and the passage of time, the face was unmistakable. The boy Miguel had trained beside in Victoria Park's pre-dawn hours, the young man who'd pushed him to be better, faster, stronger, the friend who'd gone on to achieve everything Miguel had once dreamed of. "Hello, Miguel," Danny said softly, his voice carrying 3 decades of separation and the weight of unspoken history. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Miguel stepped forward, his janitor's uniform a stark reminder of how differently their lives had unfolded, and wrapped his old training partner in an embrace that bridged every year, every missed conversation, every moment of wondering. What had become of the other? "Danny Chun," Miguel whispered, using the name he'd known before the world learned to call him Donnie Yen. "I can't believe it's really you." Kevin watched his father cry for the first time in his memory, but these weren't tears of sadness or pain. These were tears of joy, of recognition, of a friendship that had never truly ended despite the vast distances life had placed between them. "Dad." Kevin's voice was small, uncertain. "You really know Uncle Danny?" Miguel wiped his eyes and laughed, the sound echoing off the apartment complex walls. "Know him? Kevin, this man taught me half of everything I ever learned about martial arts. We were partners, brothers in everything but blood." Danny smiled, feeling decades of guilt and regret begin to lift from his shoulders. Some reunions were worth waiting for. The clock on Brad's office wall read 11:47 p.m., its red digits casting an ominous glow across scattered papers and empty energy drink cans. Brad sat hunched over his desk, an ice pack pressed to his still-aching jaw, trying to explain the impossible to two men who didn't appreciate impossible explanations. Viktor Volkov occupied the office's only comfortable chair with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. At 45, he'd maintained the lean, efficient build of his Spetsnaz days, though expensive Italian suits had replaced military fatigues. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his blue eyes cold as Arctic ice, and his voice carried the cultured accent of someone who'd learned English in Moscow's elite academies. "Explain to me again," Victor said with deadly patience, "how a man old enough to be your father made you unconscious in front of 40 witnesses." Alexei Volkov paced behind, his brother like a caged predator, his heavily muscled frame barely contained by his custom suit. At 38, he lacked Victor's intellectual sophistication but made up for it with the kind of physical menace that had proven useful in their line of work. Prison tattoos decorated his knuckles, and his movements carried the restless energy of someone always ready for violence. "It wasn't normal fighting," Brad protested, his voice still slightly slurred from the nerve disruption Danny had inflicted. "The guy moved like water or something. I threw my best combinations and hit nothing but air." "Water doesn't knock people unconscious," Alexei growled, his Russian accent thicker than his brother's. "You got beat by old man in tracksuit. Makes us look weak." Victor raised a hand, silencing his brother's complaints. The Volkov organization had spent 18 months establishing Brad's gym as the cornerstone of their Phoenix money laundering operation. Wealthy clients paid premium prices for private training sessions that existed only on paper, while cash from their various enterprises flowed through the gym's accounts like water through carefully designed channels. That Brad's reputation as an unbeatable fighter was crucial to maintaining the illusion. Rich men paid exorbitant fees to train with a real UFC veteran, never questioning why their monthly payments bore no relationship to actual services received. But if word spread that some random Asian man had humiliated their star attraction, "Show me the video," Victor commanded. Tyler's Instagram footage played on Brad's laptop, the 30-second clip capturing every impossible moment of Danny's systematic destruction of everything the gym claimed to represent. Victor watched it 3 times, his expression growing more thoughtful with each viewing. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting indeed." "Interesting." Brad exploded. "The guy destroyed me. Made me look like a complete amateur. Do you know what this is going to do to our membership? To our reputation?" "Perhaps," Victor said slowly. "You're looking at this backwards." He paused the video at the moment of Danny's final strike, studying the older man's form with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating threats and opportunities. Alexei, what do you see when you watch this? His brother leaned over the laptop, squinting at the screen. I see old man who got lucky. No. Victor's voice carried the tone of a professor correcting a slow student. You see a martial artist of extraordinary skill who just provided us with the most valuable marketing material we could possibly imagine. Brad stared at him in confusion. Marketing material? Victor stood and walked to the office window, looking out at the empty parking lot where, in a few hours, regular people would arrive to train and unknowingly participate in one of the Southwest's most sophisticated money laundering operations. Think about it, Bradley. An unknown fighter defeating our local champion? The betting pools alone would be enormous. International interest, underground tournaments, pay-per-view broadcasts. Victor's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating potential profits in seven-figure sums. But how do we get him to fight? Alexei asked, finally grasping his brother's vision. Victor smiled, the expression carrying no warmth whatsoever. Everyone has pressure points, brother. We simply need to find his. Outside in the parking lot, a black Mercedes sat in the shadows, its occupants unaware that their surveillance had been noted by other eyes, other watchers who were already beginning to formulate plans of their own. Phoenix Police Detective Ray Morales finished his third cup of coffee at 2:15 a.m., staring at financial documents spread across his kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. For 8 months, he'd been tracking unusual cash flows through dozens of local businesses, following a trail of breadcrumbs that seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere. His phone buzzed with a text from his CI. Check your email. Video from that MMA gym might interest you. The footage Tyler had uploaded to Instagram had already gone viral in Phoenix's underground fighting community, spreading through group chats and private messages faster than the flu. Ray watched the 30-second clip with growing fascination. Not because of the martial arts demonstration, but because of the location. Apex MMA Academy had been on his radar for months. Their reported income seemed impossibly high for their modest membership, and their cash deposits followed patterns that suggested structured transactions designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. But proving money laundering required more than suspicious patterns. It required evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, someone willing to testify. Ray's phone rang, interrupting his analysis. Morales. Detective, this is Agent Patricia Santos, FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. I believe we need to talk. 20 minutes later, they sat in an all-night diner on Van Buren, two law enforcement professionals sharing information over burnt coffee and day-old pie. Santos was compact and intense, with the focused energy of someone who'd spent years following money trails through increasingly complex criminal organizations. Your gym connects to our investigation, Santos explained, sliding a file folder across the Formica table. We've been tracking the Volkov brothers for 3 years, started in Los Angeles, followed them through Vegas. Now they're setting up operations here. Ray flipped through surveillance photos of Viktor and Alexei Volkov, along with financial records showing their gradual infiltration of Phoenix's business community. Restaurants, auto repair shops, entertainment venues, all legitimate businesses that served as fronts for washing money from drugs, human trafficking, and illegal gambling. The gym is their newest acquisition, Santos continued. Perfect cover story, rich clients paying premium prices for exclusive training. Except most of these clients don't exist, and the ones who do are paying for services they never receive. So what's your play? Ray asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We need someone inside. Someone with access to their operations, their records, their trust. Santos paused, stirring sugar into coffee that was already too sweet. We've identified a potential asset. She slid another photograph across the table. Ray recognized the face immediately. Miguel Martinez, the quiet janitor who worked at the community center, whose son had apparently triggered tonight's viral video incident. Martinez has been on our recruitment list for months, Santos explained. Clean background, legitimate financial need, access to multiple business locations through his janitorial contracts. We've been looking for the right approach, the right pressure to bring him on board. Ray studied Miguel's photo, thinking about the man's 12-year-old son and the modest apartment where they lived. What kind of pressure? The kind that comes from wanting to protect your family, Santos replied grimly. The Volkovs don't leave loose ends, detective. If they decide Miguel's boy is a liability. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Both law enforcement officers had seen enough crime scenes to understand how organizations like the Volkovs handled potential problems. Timeline, Ray asked. Soon. Very soon. Santos gathered her files and stood to leave. That video is going to change everything. The Volkovs will either see opportunity or threat, and either way, people are going to get hurt. As she walked out into the desert night, Ray remained at the table, staring at Miguel Martinez's photograph and wondering if they were about to save a family or destroy one. But Kevin Martinez walked his usual route to Phoenix Elementary School, his backpack bouncing with each step as he navigated the quiet residential streets of his neighborhood. The morning sun painted everything in soft gold, and for the first time in months, he felt genuinely excited about the day ahead. He couldn't wait to tell his best friend Marcus about meeting Uncle Danny, the real martial arts master his father had trained with in Hong Kong. The black Mercedes sedan had been following him for 3 blocks, maintaining careful distance while its occupants studied the boy's routine. Alexei Volkov sat in the passenger seat, his thick fingers drumming impatiently against the dashboard as they approached the intersection where Kevin always waited for the crossing light. This is stupid plan, Alexei muttered in Russian. Why? Not just grab the old man directly. Because direct approaches create complications, Victor replied from the driver's seat, his eyes never leaving their target. This way, our new friend comes willingly, even gratefully. No police involvement, no messy investigations. Kevin reached the busy intersection of Indian School Road and 24th Street, pressing the pedestrian crossing button while morning commuters rushed past in both directions. He pulled out his phone, checking the time, 7:48 a.m., plenty of time before first bell. The Mercedes pulled to the curb half a block away, engine idling as Victor studied the traffic patterns and pedestrian flow. Perfect location, busy enough that no one would pay attention to another adult helping a child, isolated enough that intervention would be impossible. 2 men in dark suits emerged from the sedan, walking casually toward the intersection with the practiced efficiency of professionals. The taller one, Dmitry Kozlov, had been handling acquisitions for the Volkov organization for over a decade. His partner, Stefan Petrov, specialized in making people disappear without leaving traces. Kevin noticed them approaching but thought nothing of it. Just 2 businessmen heading to work, probably cutting through the neighborhood to avoid Main Street traffic. He was focused on composing a text to his father about having lunch with Uncle Danny after school. Excuse me, young man, Dmitry called out in accented English, pulling out his phone to display a photograph. Do you know these 2 men? Kevin looked at the screen and his face lit up with recognition. The photo showed his father and Uncle Danny sitting together in what appeared to be their apartment living room, both men smiling at the camera. That's my dad and Uncle Danny, Kevin exclaimed. Where did you get this picture? We're friends of theirs, Stefan replied smoothly, moving to Kevin's other side with casual precision. They sent us to pick you up. There's been a change of plans for today. Kevin's excitement faltered slightly. His father was obsessively punctual and never changed plans without calling first. My dad didn't call the school. He always calls. When there wasn't time, Dmitry interrupted, his hand settling on Kevin's shoulder with gentle but unmistakable firmness. It's a surprise, actually. Uncle Danny wanted to show you something special before he has to leave Phoenix. The mention of Uncle Danny leaving triggered Kevin's deepest fear, that this wonderful reunion with his father's old friend would end as quickly as it had begun. The possibility of missing time with his newfound martial arts uncle overrode his usual caution about talking to strangers. Really? What kind of surprise? A white panel van pulled up to the curb, its side door sliding open to reveal an interior modified with tinted windows and soundproofing. To Kevin, it looked like any contractor's work vehicle. To the trained eye, it was a mobile prison designed for transporting unwilling passengers. Why don't you get in and we'll show you? Stefan suggested, his smile never wavering as he guided Kevin toward the van's open door. By the time Kevin realized something was wrong, the door had already slammed shut behind him. And Phoenix Elementary School's first bell was ringing for students who would never see their classmate again. The abandoned warehouse sat like a concrete tumor in Phoenix's industrial district, surrounded by razor wire and the scattered debris of failed businesses. Inside, the Volkov brothers had constructed something that resembled a gladiatorial arena more than a fighting gym. Professional lighting rigs, medical stations, and betting terminals that could handle millions in illegal wagers. Danny stood in the center of the makeshift octagon, his tracksuit replaced by simple black shorts and a white tank top that revealed the lean, efficient musculature of a lifetime martial artist. Around him, an audience of criminals, corrupt officials, and wealthy thrill-seekers watched with the hungry anticipation of Romans at the Colosseum. Ladies and gentlemen, Viktor Volkov's cultured voice echoed through wireless speakers. Tonight we witnessed something unprecedented, a legendary martial artist forced to prove his skills against our finest fighters. Kevin sat tied to a chair, on a raised platform where Danny could see him, the boy's eyes wide with fear, but his posture maintaining the dignity his father had taught him. Guards flanked him on both sides, their message clear: one wrong move from Danny, and the child would pay the price. The rules are simple, Victor continued. Our guest will face 3 opponents in succession. Victory means the boy remains unharmed. Defeat. He let the implication hang in the air like smoke that Danny's first opponent emerged from the shadows like something from a nightmare. Toa Feliata stood 6'8" and weighed over 300 pounds, his massive frame covered in traditional Samoan tattoos that told stories of violence stretching back generations. He'd been banned from professional fighting after hospitalizing 3 opponents, but the underground circuit welcomed his particular brand of brutality. You ready for some education, old man? Toa's voice rumbled like distant thunder, his accent thick with island menace. Danny settled into his fighting stance, the same balanced position he'd held countless times in movies, demonstrations, and real confrontations. But this time felt different, more focused, more dangerous. This wasn't choreographed combat or exhibition sparring. This was life and death, with an innocent child's safety hanging in the balance. The bell rang, and Toa charged forward like a runaway freight train, using his massive size to corner Danny against the cage walls. His strategy was simple: overwhelm with power, crush with weight. In fights before technique could matter, but Danny had spent decades learning that the greatest strength often came from redirecting force rather than opposing it. As Toa's massive fists thundered toward his head, Danny flowed like water around the attacks, using footwork and angles to make the giant's size work against him. The first exchange lasted 10 seconds and ended with Toa face down on the canvas, victim of a perfectly executed ankle pick that sent 300 pounds of muscle crashing to the mat with bone-jarring force. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in amazed chatter as Danny helped his unconscious opponent to his feet with the same respectful bow he'd shown Brad earlier. Impressive, Victor's voice carried genuine appreciation. But we're just getting started. Danny looked up at Kevin, whose frightened expression had transformed into something approaching awe. The boy was learning that legends weren't made in movies. They were forged in moments like these. The warehouse's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Danny's sweat-dampened face as medics carried Toa's unconscious form to the medical station. The Samoan giant would recover, but his reputation as an unstoppable force had been shattered in less than a minute by an opponent old enough to be his father. Viktor Volkov studied Danny from his elevated observation deck, mentally calculating odds and profits while his brother Alexei handled the increasingly frantic betting action. International gamblers were placing 7-figure wagers through encrypted networks, drawn by footage of an aging martial artist doing the impossible. Next opponent, Victor announced, his voice carrying the theatrical flair of a master showman. From the frozen battlefields of Siberia, weighing 240 pounds of pure violence, Boris, the Siberian Express Volkov. No relation to the crime family despite the shared surname. Boris emerged from the shadows like winter personified. His pale skin bore the scars of countless street fights, and his dead blue eyes suggested someone who'd crossed moral lines that could never be uncrossed. Unlike Toa's raw power, Boris brought the calculated brutality of someone who'd learned violence as a survival skill in Russian prisons. Danny watched his second opponent with the analytical eye of someone who'd studied fighters from every discipline. Boris moved with the economic efficiency of a predator, no wasted motion, no emotional investment in the outcome. This wouldn't be about overwhelming force. This would be about endurance, technique, and the willingness to inflict maximum damage with minimum effort. You know what happened to last man who embarrassed Volkov organization? Boris asked in heavily accented English, his voice carrying the flat effect of a sociopath. They found pieces of him scattered across 3 states. Danny's response was to bow respectfully, the gesture so incongruous in this environment of criminal violence that several spectators laughed nervously. But Kevin, watching from his elevated prison, understood the deeper message. His uncle Danny would maintain honor even in the depths of hell. The bell rang, and Boris immediately established his game plan. Constant pressure, systematic body shots, grinding attrition designed to break down opponents through accumulated damage. His boxing was technically sound but brutal, each punch thrown with the intention of causing lasting harm. Danny found himself in a chess match fought with fists and feet. Boris's experience showed in his defensive positioning and counterattacking instincts, but Danny's decades of training in multiple disciplines gave him options the Russian couldn't anticipate. Wing Chun trapping neutralized Boris's boxing combinations. Jeet Kune Do footwork kept Danny out of range of the devastating clinch, work that had destroyed previous opponents. And when Boris tried to take the fight to the ground, Danny's understanding of leverage and pressure points turned the Russians' own aggression against him. The finish came in the 4th round, when Boris's methodical brutality finally created an opening Danny could exploit. A perfectly timed pressure point strike to the Russian's neck disrupted his nervous system just long enough for Danny to apply a blood choke that rendered him unconscious without permanent damage. As Boris collapsed, the warehouse erupted in a maze conversation. 2 professional killers, 2 different fighting styles, 2 decisive victories for a man who should have been overwhelmed by younger, stronger opponents. Victor leaned forward, his calculating mind already working through the implications. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a phenomenon that could reshape their entire operation. One more, he announced, though his voice now carried genuine respect alongside the showmanship. But our final opponent represents something special. Danny looked up at Kevin, seeing pride mixed with terror in the boy's eyes, and prepared himself for whatever nightmare Victor had saved for last. Miguel Martinez stared at the FBI identification card agent Patricia Santos had just placed on his kitchen table, the federal badge gleaming under the apartment's fluorescent light like an accusation. Around them, the modest living room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in on a life built on careful lies and necessary deceptions. 18 months, Miguel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of isolation that came from living a double life. 18 months of mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and pretending to be invisible while I documented every suspicious transaction, every coded conversation, every face that didn't belong. Santos nodded, recognizing the exhaustion in Miguel's voice. Deep cover operations extracted a psychological toll that few people could sustain long-term. The constant vigilance, the separation from authentic relationships, the knowledge that discovery meant death, it aged people in ways that went beyond mere years. The Volkov brothers suspected nothing? Danny asked, still processing the revelation that his old training partner had been living as an undercover federal agent. They see what they expect to see, Miguel replied, pulling out a secure laptop. From beneath a loose floorboard, a quiet janitor who cleans their businesses, empties their waste baskets, and disappears into the background like furniture. The laptop screen revealed months of accumulated evidence, photographs of money transfers, audio recordings of incriminating conversations, detailed financial records showing how legitimate businesses served as fronts for washing criminal proceeds. It was a prosecutor's dream, representing hundreds of hours of dangerous intelligence gathering. My community center job provides perfect cover, Miguel continued, his fingers dancing across the keyboard to reveal surveillance photos. I clean the offices of 17 businesses connected to their operation. They discuss everything in front of me because I'm just the help, invisible, harmless, not worth noticing. Danny studied the photographs and documents, recognizing faces from the warehouse audience. How long before you can move against them? We were close, Santos interjected, her expression grim. Another month, maybe two, and we'd have enough evidence to dismantle their entire Southwest network. But your involvement has accelerated their timeline. She pulled up surveillance footage from the warehouse fight, showing Danny's systematic destruction of Toa and Boris. The video had already spread through criminal networks worldwide, generating international attention the Volkovs had never experienced. They're moving faster now, taking bigger risks. Santos explained, your presence has made them bold, but it's also made them sloppy. They're exposing assets we didn't even know existed. Miguel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his FBI handler. His face went pale as he read the brief text, package delivered, timeline advanced, Operation Green Light in 48 hours. What does that mean? Danny asked, though the fear in Miguel's eyes already suggested the answer. It means they've taken Kevin, Miguel said, his voice cracking with the weight of every parent's worst nightmare. And it means we're out of time. Santos immediately began making calls, coordinating with tactical teams and surveillance units. But Danny was already moving toward the door with the focused intensity of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. Where are you going? Miguel called after him. To get my nephew back, Danny replied, using the family term that transcended blood relations. Whatever Viktor Volkov wants from me, he's about to get it. But what the crime boss didn't understand was that forcing Donnie Yen into a corner wasn't a tactical advantage. It was the mistake that would bring down his entire organization. Miguel grabbed his friend's arm, stopping him at the threshold. Danny, this isn't a movie. These people kill without hesitation, and they have nothing to lose. Danny looked back, with eyes that carried the weight of every character he'd ever played, every technique he'd ever mastered, every principle he'd ever fought to uphold. Neither do I, he said simply, and walked into the Phoenix night to face whatever horrors awaited him. The nondescript office building on the outskirts of Scottsdale served as Tyler Brennan's base of operations, though few people knew the 17-year-old's true identity. To his MMA training partners, he was just another cocky teenager with wealthy parents and championship aspirations. To his teachers at Phoenix Prep Academy, he was a B student more interested in athletics than academics. But in the soundproof conference room on the building's third floor, Tyler shed his adolescent disguise and became Tyler Volkov, blood nephew of the most dangerous crime family in the Southwest, trained from childhood to serve as their eyes and ears in places adults couldn't penetrate. The old man and his janitor friend are planning something, Tyler reported to his uncles via encrypted video call, his teenage voice carrying the cold professionalism of someone raised in violence. I planted listening devices in the gym office after their meeting. They know about the money laundering, and they know about Kevin. Victor's face filled the laptop screen, his expression thoughtful as he processed this intelligence. Show me the recordings. Tyler played back crystal-clear audio of Danny and Miguel's conversation, every word captured by military-grade surveillance equipment hidden throughout Apex MMA Academy. The recording revealed Miguel's FBI connection, their planned coordination with federal agents, and most damaging of all, their complete operational timeline. Interesting, Victor mused, his calculating mind already adjusting strategies. So our modest janitor is actually a federal agent, and our legendary martial artist is walking into a trap he believes he's setting. Alexei's angry voice erupted from the laptop speakers. We should eliminate them both immediately. Too much risk, too much exposure. No, brother, Victor replied calmly. This is opportunity, not crisis. We simply adjust our approach. Tyler leaned forward, eager to contribute to the strategic discussion. I can provide real-time intelligence from inside their operation. They trust me completely, just another stupid kid who got caught up in adult business. The family resemblance was obvious now that Tyler had dropped his teenage facade. He possessed the same cold blue eyes as his uncles, the same calculating intelligence that had built their criminal empire, and the same casual comfort with violence that marked all Volkov men. Your father would be proud, Victor said, referencing Tyler's deceased parent, the third Volkov brother who died in a Las Vegas gang war 3 years earlier. But this requires more sophisticated planning than simple surveillance. Tyler's Phone buzzed with an encrypted message containing new coordinates and operational details. His assignment was elegant in its simplicity. Continue playing the role of confused teenager while secretly orchestrating the capture of both Danny and Miguel during their attempted rescue mission. The FBI thinks they're running a sting operation, Victor explained, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a master chess player seeing victory 20 moves ahead. Instead, they're delivering our most valuable assets directly into our hands. Tyler studied the tactical layout on his laptop screen, memorizing guard positions, escape routes, and communication protocols. Tomorrow night's warehouse tournament would be more than entertainment for wealthy criminals. It would be the grand finale of an 18-month investigation that would end with federal agents dead and the Volkov organization stronger than ever. "What about the boy?" Tyler asked, though his tone suggested Kevin's welfare was a minor operational detail rather than a moral consideration. "The child serves his purpose," Victor replied coldly. "After that, he becomes a liability that must be eliminated." Tyler nodded, accepting the necessity of murdering a 12-year-old with the same casual indifference his family applied to all business decisions. In the Volkov organization, sentiment was weakness, and weakness was fatal. As the video call ended, Tyler returned to his teenage disguise, styled hair, designer clothes, the cocky swagger of privileged youth. Tomorrow he would play his role perfectly, betraying people who considered him a victim rather than a predator. But tonight, he would savor the anticipation of watching his legendary opponent discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones you never saw coming. The silence in Miguel's apartment felt heavier than concrete as Danny stared at the broken door frame and scattered family photographs littering the hardwood floor. Overturned furniture and the lingering scent of fear painted a clear picture. The Volkovs had moved faster than anyone anticipated, turning a carefully planned rescue operation into a nightmare scenario. Danny knelt beside a school photo of Kevin. The glass cracked, but the boy's proud smile still visible beneath the spider web of fractures. Beside it lay Miguel's FBI laptop, its screen shattered and hard drive removed with surgical precision. The message was unmistakable. 18 months of undercover work had been compromised in a single violent moment. "They knew," Danny said, quietly, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal and tactical disaster. "Somehow, they knew about Miguel's real identity, about our plans, about everything." Agent Santos stood in the doorway, her face pale as she surveyed the destruction. 3 FBI surveillance teams had been monitoring the apartment complex, yet somehow the Volkovs had extracted both Miguel and Kevin without triggering a single alarm. The operational security breach suggested insider knowledge at the highest levels. "The listening devices we found in the gym office were decoys," Santos reported, her voice tight with professional frustration. "While we were focused on those, they had surveillance equipment we never detected. Every conversation, every plan, every tactical detail, they heard it all." Danny moved through the small apartment with the focused intensity of someone reading a crime scene. In the kitchen, Miguel's morning coffee sat half-finished, still warm. In Kevin's bedroom, homework lay scattered across a desk, math problems abandoned mid-equation. The violence had been swift, efficient, and precisely timed on a manila envelope. Sat prominently on the dining table, positioned where it couldn't be missed. Inside, Danny found a single photograph showing Kevin and Miguel bound to chairs in what appeared to be an industrial setting, both alive but clearly terrified. A handwritten note in elegant script provided coordinates and a time, 11 p.m. "Come alone or watch them die on live stream." "It's a trap," Santos stated the obvious, though her tone suggested she understood the irrelevance of tactical assessment. "They're using your emotional connection to Kevin to force you into a controlled environment where they hold every advantage." Danny pocketed the photograph and note, his expression settling into something that transcended mere determination. "Then it's a trap I'm walking into. We can coordinate tactical support," Santos offered, though they both knew federal intervention would likely trigger the hostages' immediate execution. "SWAT teams, surveillance drones, electronic countermeasures. No." Danny's voice carried finality that admitted no argument. "Viktor Volkov wants Donnie Yen, not a federal task force. He gets what he wants, but not the way he expects it. The coordinates led to an abandoned aircraft hangar complex 30 miles outside Phoenix, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry and federal surveillance would be easily detected. As Danny studied the location on his phone's GPS, he realized Victor had chosen the perfect killing ground: remote, defensible, and far from any possibility of rescue. But what Victor didn't understand was that isolation worked both ways. In the desert, far from cameras and witnesses, Danny could become something more dangerous than a martial arts legend. He could become what he'd always been beneath the fame and philosophy: a weapon forged in decades of training and tempered by righteous fury. The abandoned aircraft hangar loomed against the star-filled Arizona sky like a monument to forgotten dreams, its rusted metal walls bearing the faded logos of airlines that had died decades before. Danny's rental car crunched across gravel that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration, headlights cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself. The facility was far more elaborate than the warehouse where he'd fought Toa and Boris. Professional broadcast equipment lined elevated platforms. Luxury seating accommodated perhaps 200 wealthy spectators, and armed security moved with military precision through shadows cast by industrial lighting rigs. This wasn't just another underground fight. This was a production designed for international distribution. Viktor Volkov greeted Danny personally at the hangar's main entrance, his tailored suit immaculate despite the industrial setting. "Welcome to the real show, Mr. Yen. I trust you appreciate the upgrades we've made since your last performance." Danny's eyes swept the arena, cataloging exits, guard positions, and potential weapons while maintaining the calm demeanor that had served him through decades of dangerous situations. "Where are Kevin and Miguel?" "Safe, for now," Victor replied, gesturing toward an elevated platform where both hostages sat bound to chairs under harsh spotlights. Miguel's janitor uniform was torn and bloodied, but his posture remained defiant. Kevin looked terrified but unbroken, his young face set in lines that reminded Danny powerfully of his father. The crowd was different from the warehouse audience. More international, more sophisticated, more obviously wealthy. Danny recognized faces from FBI wanted posters mixed with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders whose public images would never survive association with this level of criminal entertainment. Tonight's tournament is being broadcast to private networks in 17 countries, Victor explained with obvious pride. The betting pools have exceeded $50 million, with most of that money wagered against your survival. Tyler Brennan emerged from the crowd, his teenage features twisted into a smirk that belonged on someone 3 times his age. "Surprise, old man. Did you really think some dumb kid just happened to overhear your super-secret plans?" The betrayal hit Danny like a physical blow, not because of tactical implications, but because of what it meant for Kevin's psychological state. The boy had trusted Tyler, considered him a friend despite their adversarial introduction. Learning that friendship was a lie would damage something in Kevin that might never fully heal. "Tyler Volkov," Danny said, the family name explaining everything about the teenager's sophisticated deception. "How long have you been embedded at the gym?" 2 years, Tyler replied proudly. "Long enough to identify every potential threat, every possible asset, every weakness in their security. You walked into our trap the moment you decided to play hero." Victor led Danny toward the main arena floor, where a regulation octagon had been constructed with professional-grade equipment and medical facilities that suggested fights were expected to produce serious injuries. The elevated platform holding Kevin and Miguel was positioned where Danny could see them throughout any fight, a constant reminder of what failure would cost. "The rules are simple," Victor announced to the assembled crowd. "Winner-take-all tournament bracket. Our guest fights his way through 3 opponents to earn his freedom and that of his friends. Defeat means death for all 3. Danny settled into his fighting stance, the same balanced position he'd held in countless movies and real confrontations. But this time carried weight that transcended any previous experience, not just his own life, but the lives of people he loved hanging. In the balance, your first opponent, Victor continued, his voice carrying theatrical menace, represents something special. Someone who knows your fighting style intimately, someone who's studied every technique, every weakness, every limitation. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Danny's blood ran cold as he recognized the face. The nightmare was about to become personal. Danny's first opponent stepped into the octagon's harsh lighting, and the revelation hit the audience like a physical shockwave. Chen Wei-ming had been Danny's stunt double for over a decade, learning every technique, every combination, every signature move that had made Donnie Yen a global icon. But the man facing Danny now bore little resemblance to the dedicated professional who'd helped create some of cinema's greatest fight scenes. Chen's eyes carried the hollow look of someone whose soul had been systematically destroyed, his movements showing the mechanical precision of intensive conditioning rather than martial arts philosophy. Scars covered his arms and torso, evidence of brutal training designed to eliminate weakness through pain and repetition. They took him 18 months ago, Victor explained to the fascinated crowd. Captured during a film shoot in Malaysia, then spent over a year breaking down everything that made him human. What you see now is the perfect anti-Donnie Yen weapon. Someone who knows every technique you've ever used, but freed from the moral limitations that make you predictable. Danny stared at his former colleague with growing horror, recognizing the systematic psychological destruction that had transformed a gentle artist into a hollow killing machine. Chen had once been a devoted family man, a practitioner of traditional martial arts who viewed their collaboration as preserving ancient wisdom for modern audiences. Chun, Danny called out softly in Cantonese, hoping to reach whatever remained of his friend's humanity. Do you remember the temple in Foshan? The forms we practiced together before dawn shoots. Chen's response was a blur of violence that nearly took Danny's head off, combinations that mixed Danny's own signature techniques with brutal modifications designed to inflict maximum damage. The psychological warfare was perfectly calculated, fighting someone who moved like a dark mirror image, someone who anticipated every defensive strategy because he'd helped develop them. The crowd roared its approval as Danny was forced into pure defensive mode, barely avoiding strikes that carried lethal intent. Chen fought without honor, without restraint, without any of the philosophical foundation that separated martial artists from mere killers. Every technique Danny had ever used in movies was turned against him with added brutality and zero mercy. But Danny possessed something Chun had been systematically stripped of, the ability to adapt, to improvise, to find solutions that transcended mere technique. As the fight progressed, Danny began incorporating elements Chun had never seen, drawing on decades of continuous learning that went beyond their collaborative work. Wing Chun flows gave way to Jeet Kune Do combinations that Chun couldn't predict. Traditional forms merged with practical applications that had never appeared in films. Most importantly, Danny fought with the wisdom that came from understanding martial arts as a way of life rather than merely a collection of deadly techniques. The finish came when Danny managed to trap Chun in a position that required a philosophical choice rather than a technical response. Instead of delivering a killing blow, Danny applied a blood choke that rendered Chun unconscious without permanent damage, then held his former friend as he collapsed. "I'm sorry," Danny whispered in Cantonese as medics rushed to check Chen's vital signs. "I'm so sorry they did this to you." The crowd's reaction was mixed, appreciation for technical excellence overshadowed by confusion at Danny's mercy towards someone who tried to kill him. But Kevin, watching from his elevated prison, understood the deeper lesson his uncle Danny was teaching through action rather than words. True strength meant protecting others, even when those others had been turned into weapons against you to victors. Voice cut through the arena's buzz with renewed menace. Touching display of sentiment. Let's see how that philosophy serves you against your next opponent. Tyler Volkov stepped into the octagon with the arrogant swagger of someone half Danny's age who'd never experienced genuine defeat. At 17, he possessed the speed and conditioning of elite youth athletics combined with training that had begun in childhood under the supervision of Russian military instructors and professional killers. "This is personal now, old man," Tyler announced, shadowboxing with fluid combinations that showcased years of dedicated training. "You humiliated my family, destroyed our reputation, and cost us millions in revenue. Time to pay the price." Danny studied his opponent with the analytical eye of someone who'd faced hundreds of fighters across multiple decades. Tyler was technically skilled, physically gifted, and completely without the moral restraints that had limited his previous opponents. But he was also young, arrogant, and fighting with emotional investment rather than tactical precision. Tyler, Danny said quietly, you don't have to do this. Whatever they've taught you, whatever they've made you believe, you're still just a boy who's been raised by wolves. Tyler's response was a vicious combination that would have hospitalized most opponents, his strikes carrying the intent to maim, rather than simply defeat. Unlike Chin's mechanical brutality, Tyler fought with personal hatred that made every technique more dangerous but also more predictable. The crowd sensed the different energy immediately. Where the previous fight had been technically fascinating, this confrontation carried the raw emotional intensity of generational conflict. Tyler represented everything wrong with contemporary fighting culture: talent without wisdom, skill without honor, power without responsibility. Danny found himself in a strange pedagogical position, using the fight to teach lessons Tyler was too consumed with hatred to receive. Every exchange became a demonstration of why martial arts philosophy mattered more than technical ability, why character development was inseparable from physical training. When Tyler's aggression created openings, Danny exploited them with minimal necessary force. When the teenager's combinations became sloppy due to anger, Danny countered with precise techniques that showcased the difference between reactive fighting and responsive martial arts. You're holding back, Tyler screamed in frustration, his careful game plan deteriorating into emotional chaos. Fight me like you mean it. I am fighting you exactly as I mean to, Danny replied calmly, deflecting a wild haymaker and responding with a gentle palm strike that pushed Tyler away rather than inflicting damage. The question is what you think fighting actually means. The philosophical combat continued for 3 rounds, with Danny systematically dismantling Tyler's aggression while demonstrating that true martial arts mastery involved controlling the tempo and emotional content of conflict itself. Every technique carried a lesson about patience, precision, and the power that came from fighting with clear purpose rather than personal vendetta. The end came when Tyler's frustration led him to attempt a technique beyond his skill level, a flying knee that left him completely exposed in midair. Danny could have finished the fight with devastating counters that would have sent the teenager to the hospital or worse. Instead, he caught Tyler mid-flight and gently placed him on the ground, applying a blood choke that rendered him unconscious. Without injury to AS, Tyler collapsed. Danny looked up at Kevin and saw something that made the entire ordeal worthwhile: understanding. The boy had witnessed his uncle Danny face 2 dangerous opponents and defeat both through skill, wisdom, and mercy rather than hatred and brutality. The lesson was complete, but the nightmare was far from over. Viktor Volkov's voice cut through the arena with deadly finality. Impressive philosophy, Mr. Yen. Now let's see how it serves you against someone who shares your commitment to traditional values. Viktor Volkov descended from his elevated observation platform with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of violence. Unlike his previous fighters, Viktor didn't need introduction or theatrical presentation. His reputation preceded him like a shadow cast by death itself. 47 kills in Chechnya, Viktor announced to the hushed crowd as he removed his expensive suit jacket, revealing the lean, efficient physique of a man who'd maintained military conditioning well into middle age. 12 more in Afghanistan and uncounted eliminations during my transition to private enterprise. Danny watched his final opponent with the focused attention of someone who recognized genuine danger. Viktor moved with the economical precision of Systema, Russian military martial arts designed for battlefield efficiency rather than sporting competition. Every gesture was calculated, every step purposeful, every breath controlled. You fight with honor, Mr. Yen, Viktor continued, stretching with movements that seemed casual but served to demonstrate his flexibility and balance. I respect that philosophy, even as I prepare to kill you with it. The psychological warfare was more sophisticated than anything Danny had faced in the previous fights. Viktor wasn't trying to intimidate through displays of aggression or technical prowess. He was establishing himself as an equal, someone who understood martial arts principles but had chosen to use them for fundamentally different purposes. Kevin, Danny called out to his nephew in Cantonese, his voice carrying calm assurance despite the desperate circumstances. Remember what your father taught you about breathing. Control your fear, and fear cannot control you. The boy nodded, His young face, set in lines that spoke of growing maturity forged in the crucible of terror. Miguel struggled against his restraints, his FBI training warring with paternal instinct as he watched his son's honorary uncle prepare to face a killer whose skills matched his own. Victor settled into his fighting stance, balanced, ready, radiating the contained lethality of someone who'd spent decades studying the most efficient ways to end human life. Systema teaches that every technique must serve multiple purposes, he explained conversationally. Strike to disable, position to control, control to kill. The bell rang, and both men began circling each other with the patient intensity of apex predators who recognized worthy opposition. Unlike the aggressive rushes of previous opponents, this confrontation began as a chess match fought with bodies instead of pieces. Victor's first attack was a testing probe, a seemingly casual step forward that concealed a devastating knee strike designed to shatter ribs. Danny's counter was equally subtle, a slight shift in position that made the attack miss by inches while creating his own striking opportunity. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed something unprecedented, two masters of different martial arts traditions engaging in combat at the highest possible level. Every movement carried meaning. Every exchange revealed layers of strategy and counter-strategy that most observers couldn't comprehend. "You understand," Victor said approvingly as they separated after the first exchange. "This isn't about youth, or strength, or even technique. This is about who wants to live more than the other wants to kill." Danny's response was to settle deeper into his stance, drawing upon decades of training that went beyond movie choreography or exhibition demonstrations. This was martial arts at its purest: life against death, philosophy against brutality, honor against expedience. The real fight was just beginning. The battle between Danny and Victor evolved into something that transcended ordinary combat, becoming a clash between two martial arts philosophies refined through decades of real-world application. Where Danny's techniques flowed like water, adaptive, precise, seeking the path of least resistance, Victor's systema was methodically brutal, each movement designed to inflict maximum damage while creating tactical advantages. Victor's approach was surgical in its efficiency. He used psychological pressure points as readily as physical ones, maintaining constant verbal commentary designed to disrupt Danny's mental equilibrium while executing techniques that seemed casual but carried lethal intent. "Your movies made martial arts look like dancing," Victor observed while deflecting Danny's combination with movements that seemed almost lazy. "But real fighting is about breaking things, bones, spirits." Well, to continue, Danny found himself in the most challenging fight of his life, facing an opponent who possessed both technical mastery and the moral flexibility to use that skill without restraint. Victor fought dirty when advantageous, fought clean when tactical, and shifted between approaches with the calculating precision of someone who viewed combat as applied physics rather than philosophical expression. The system of techniques were unlike anything Danny had faced in movies or sport fighting. Victor attacked joints, targeted nerve clusters, and used leverage systems designed to control opponents through pain compliance rather than simple, overwhelming force. Every exchange left Danny with new aches, new limitations, new understanding of how efficiently a human body could be systematically dismantled. But Danny possessed something Victor had abandoned years ago: the ability to fight with complete commitment while maintaining ethical boundaries. His counters were devastating, but not permanently damaging. His strikes precise, but not designed to kill or maim. The philosophical difference was subtle but crucial, allowing Danny to fight with full intensity while Victor was forced to constantly choose between maximum effectiveness and tactical restraint. 20 minutes into the fight, both men showed signs of serious fatigue, but the combat continued with undiminished intensity. Victor's military conditioning served him well, but Danny's decades of film work had given him experience with sustained physical performance under extreme stress. The turning point came when Victor attempted to use Kevin as psychological leverage, feinting toward the elevated platform where the hostages were held while launching a surprise attack from an unexpected angle. The tactical deception was brilliant, forcing Danny to choose between protecting himself and positioning to defend his nephew. Danny chose a third option, redirecting Victor's momentum while simultaneously moving toward the platform. using Wing Chun's simultaneous attack and defense principles to create a solution that served both purposes. The counterattack was devastating. Danny caught Victor mid-combination, used trapping techniques to control both arms, and delivered a series of pressure point strikes that disrupted the Russian's nervous system without causing permanent damage. Victor collapsed, conscious but temporarily paralyzed, his systematic brutality finally neutralized by systematic precision. The crowd erupted in amazed conversation as Danny immediately moved to check Victor's vital signs, ensuring his defeated opponent was breathing normally and would recover without lasting injury. Even in victory, even after facing someone who'd tried to kill him, Danny maintained the martial arts principles that separated warriors from mere fighters. "It's over," Danny announced to the stunned audience, his voice carrying absolute authority. Despite his exhaustion, "Release the hostages." But as he looked up at the elevated platform, Danny realized the nightmare wasn't finished, it was entering its final, most dangerous phase. Victor's security team moved with military precision as their leader lay defeated on the octagon floor. But instead of surrendering or negotiating, they drew weapons and took defensive positions throughout the hangar. What should have been Danny's moment of triumph transformed into a standoff that threatened to end with everyone dead. Nobody moves. The lead guard's voice echoed through the arena as a dozen assault rifles targeted Danny, the hostages, and any spectators foolish enough to attempt escape. Mr. Volkov gave explicit instructions for this contingency. Victor struggled to his feet, his systema training allowing him to function despite the nerve disruption Danny had inflicted. Blood trickled from his mouth, and his movements showed the careful precision of someone fighting through significant pain. But his eyes retained the cold calculation that had made him one of the Southwest's most dangerous criminals. "Impressive, Mr. Yen," Victor managed, his accent thicker now as physical trauma affected his speech. "But did you really think I would stake everything on my personal fighting ability?" He pulled a combat knife from his boot, the blade catching arena lights with malevolent gleam. "Systema teaches contingency planning above all else. If I cannot defeat you in single combat, I simply change the parameters of engagement." Danny remained in fighting stance despite his exhaustion, but he understood the tactical reality. Armed guards at multiple positions, innocent hostages in the line of fire, and nowhere to run in the isolated hangar complex. This wasn't a martial arts problem anymore. It was a military situation that required different solutions. "The original arrangement stands," Victor continued, moving toward the platform where Kevin and Miguel sat bound. "You fought magnificently, earned the right to live, but unfortunately demonstrated that you're too dangerous to be allowed freedom." Kevin struggled against his restraints as Victor approached with the knife, his young face showing terror but also the stubborn courage he'd inherited from his father. Miguel watched helplessly, his FBI training useless in bonds designed by people who understood restraint techniques. However, Victor added with theatrical cruelty, "I'm prepared to offer modified terms. You surrender willingly, accept execution, without resistance, and the boy lives to grow up in our organization. Refuse, and watch him die slowly while my men ensure you're too wounded to interfere." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence, forcing Danny to confront the ultimate test of martial arts philosophy, whether honor meant anything when innocent lives hung in the balance. But as Victor raised the knife toward Kevin's throat, the hangar's main doors exploded inward with the distinctive boom of federal breaching charges. FBI tactical teams poured through multiple entrances simultaneously, their coordinated assault overwhelming Victor's security through superior numbers and professional training. "FBI, everybody down." Agent Santos led the assault team with the focused intensity of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. The Volkov's isolation tactics had backfired. The remote location that prevented federal surveillance also prevented their escape. When the tactical situation shifted, Victor's knife moved toward Kevin's throat as armed agents closed the distance. The standoff balanced on a razor's edge between rescue and tragedy, but Danny was already moving, his exhausted body finding reserves of speed and precision that transcended normal human limitations, driven by protective instinct that made martial arts philosophy irrelevant. The final confrontation lasted 3 seconds and would haunt everyone. Present for the rest of their lives, Danny's final movement combined everything he'd learned across 5 decades of martial arts training. Wing Chun's directness, Jeet Kune Do's adaptability, and the protective instinct that transformed technique into something approaching miracle. He covered the distance to the elevated platform in a single flowing motion that seemed to bend time itself, arriving just as Victor's knife began its descent toward Kevin's throat. The disarming technique was perfect in its execution and devastating in its precision. Danny's left hand controlled Victor's weapon arm, while his right delivered a pressure point strike that completely shut down the Russian's nervous system. Victor collapsed instantly, the knife clattering harmlessly across the platform as Kevin tumbled free from his restraints. Uncle Danny. Kevin threw himself into Danny's arms with the desperate relief of a child who'd faced death and found salvation in the form of his father's legendary friend. The embrace lasted only seconds before Danny was cutting Miguel's bonds with Victor's dropped knife, but it contained years of gratitude and love that no words could express. FBI agents swarmed the hangar with professional efficiency, securing weapons, processing evidence, and coordinating medical attention for the various fighters who'd been injured during the evening's violence. The international criminal audience found themselves facing federal charges that would effectively end their careers and freedom. Agent Santos approached Danny as he sat with Kevin and Miguel on the platform steps, all 3 men emotionally and physically exhausted by their ordeal. "The Volkov organization is finished," she reported with grim satisfaction. 18 months of undercover work finally paid off, thanks to your involvement forcing them into the open. Miguel held his son protectively while Danny checked the boy for injuries, their reunion made more precious by how close they'd come to permanent separation. Kevin was brave, Danny told his old friend. He maintained honor even when terrified, showed respect even to people who didn't deserve it. Just like his father taught him, Miguel replied, pride evident despite his exhaustion. And just like his uncle Danny demonstrated, Tyler Volkov sat in federal custody, his teenage bravado replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire worldview had collapsed in a single evening. The sophisticated criminal organization he'd been raised to inherit was gone, his uncle's facing life sentences, his future transformed from privilege to prosecution. 3 months later, Danny stood in the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Martinez-Chin Traditional Martial Arts Academy, watching Kevin demonstrate the Wing Chun forms they'd been practicing together. The boy moved with growing confidence and precision, but more importantly, he carried himself with the quiet dignity that marked true martial artists. "He's got natural ability," Miguel observed, pride evident as his son flowed through techniques that connected 3 generations of martial arts tradition. But more than that, he understands what it means. Danny nodded, remembering his own childhood, training and the masters who'd taught him that martial arts was about building character rather than breaking opponents. He learned the most important lesson anyone can learn, that true strength comes from protecting others, not from hurting them. The Academy's motto hung prominently above the entrance, displayed in both English and Chinese: strength through honor, victory through wisdom. Students ranging from children to senior citizens practiced together, learning that martial arts transcended age, background, and physical ability when grounded in proper philosophical foundation. Kevin approached his father and honorary uncle, his practice uniform soaked with honest sweat, but his face glowing with accomplishment. "Uncle Danny, will you teach me that technique you used to save me from the bad man?" Danny smiled, kneeling to Kevin's eye level with the patience of someone who understood that the most important victories were measured in changed lives rather than defeated opponents. "That technique, Kevin, wasn't something I learned from books or movies. It came from 30 years of understanding that martial arts is about love, love for your family, love for your community, love for principles worth defending." He gestured around the academy, where students of all ages practiced with the focused intensity of people discovering their own potential. "That's what we'll teach you here. Not just how to fight, but why fighting should always be the last resort, and how to live with honor whether you ever need to fight or not." Kevin nodded solemnly, understanding that he was being invited into something far more significant than mere martial arts training. He was joining a tradition that stretched back centuries, connecting him to his father's past and his own unlimited future. The Martinez Academy would go on to produce champions in multiple disciplines, but its greatest victory was already complete, proving that in a world increasingly obsessed with violence and aggression, there was still room for honor, wisdom, and the quiet strength that came from protecting others rather than dominating them. What happened that night in the Phoenix hangar had indeed shaken the criminal underworld, but more importantly, it had restored something that modern society desperately needed: the understanding that true legends weren't made through conquest, but through the courage to stand for principles worth defending. The boy who'd been slapped for defending his father's honor had grown into a young man who understood that honor was worth any sacrifice. And the quiet janitor had been revealed as both a federal hero and a devoted father whose greatest victory was raising a son with unshakable character. And the legendary martial artist had discovered that his most important role wasn't entertaining audiences or defeating opponents. It was passing on the wisdom that made martial arts a way of life rather than merely a way of fighting. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.